welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. It started with the emergency alert. I was driving home late that night, exhausted, barely keeping my eyes open. My shift at the warehouse had run long, overtime because someone called out, and my body felt like it was filled with cement. The radio was off, the streets were mostly empty, and I was running on fumes, both metaphorically and literally. I told myself I'd stop at the gas station near my apartment, grab a coffee, fill up, and finally sleep. Then my phone buzzed violently in the cup holder. I flinched at the harsh sound, an ear-splitting siren that seemed even louder in the dead silence of my car. My heart jolted as I reached for it, expecting the usual Amber Alert or weather warning. Instead, the text on the screen made my stomach drop. Emergency alert. Do not stop moving. Under any circumstances. I frowned at it. That was it. No details. No government agency sign off. Just those words, bold, stark, wrong. I let out a breath, rolling my shoulders, trying to shake off the weird sense of unease. Probably some glitch in the system, or a hacked alert. It had happened before: false alarms, weird mistakes. Someone at an agency pressing the wrong button. I was about to set the phone back down when another message appeared beneath the first. This is not a test. Never stop moving. My fingers tightened around the wheel. Okay, I'll admit it. That one got me. I exhaled through my nose, shaking my head. It had to be a prank, right? The traffic light ahead turned red, and I slowed to a stop. My phone was still in my hand, and I glanced at it again, debating whether to Google it. Then, in my peripheral vision, I saw something move. It was fast, so fast I barely registered it. A tall, thin shape flickering past the street lamp, its outline jagged, shifting, like a smear of ink running down a page. I turned my head, but the moment my eyes landed on the spot, it was empty. I licked my lips. My heart was thudding faster than it should have been. It was probably nothing. A trick of the light, a branch moving in the wind. I hadn't slept properly in days after all. I told myself all of that, but my fingers tightened around the wheel anyway. The light turned green. I hesitated for half a second before pressing the gas a little harder than necessary. The gas station's neon sign flickered as I pulled in, the buzzing hum of the bulbs the only sound in the night air. I parked near the entrance and stepped out, stretching my aching muscles as I shut the door. My phone buzzed again, and I sighed, finally unlocking it. Never stop moving. Okay, yeah, it was officially weird now. I walked into the gas station, shoving my phone in my pocket. The air conditioning blasted stale, overcooled air at me as I stepped inside, and I blinked against the bright fluorescent lights. The place was mostly empty except for the night cashier, a guy in his 20s with dark circles under his eyes and a paranoia-induced twitch to his movements. I headed for the back, grabbed an energy drink, and made my way to the counter. The guy barely looked at me as I set the drink down. Then my phone buzzed again, and his did too. That was the moment everything shifted. His head snapped up so fast I thought he'd given himself whiplash. His bloodshot eyes locked onto mine, and his fingers gripped the edge of the counter like he was holding on for dear life. "You got it too," he whispered. I blinked. "Ha, the alert." His voice was low, urgent. "You got the alert." I hesitated. "Yeah, some weird glitch, right?" His face went pale. "No," he said, voice barely above a breath. "Not a glitch. You need to leave. Right now." I let out a nervous chuckle. "Okay, you're kind of freaking me out, dude." His fingers twitched, his whole body vibrating like a wound-up spring. "You stopped moving, didn't you?" he asked. "At a red light? Parking your car." I stared at him. A pit was forming in my stomach. "Yeah, and?" His eyes darted to the security camera screen behind the counter. "Look at the playback." I turned. The screen showed a live feed of the gas station, for different angles covering the parking lot and store interior. And then the guy rewound it. I saw myself pulling into the lot. I saw myself step out of the car. And behind me, in the reflection of the car window, I saw it. Tall, jagged silhouette. Arms too long, legs too thin. Standing perfectly still right behind me. My throat closed up. I turned to the guy, my pulse hammering in my ears. "That's a trick. A smudge on the camera lens." "No," he said, voice shaking. "It's not." My hands were sweating. My heartbeat was too fast, my skin too cold. "But I didn't see anything." "You wouldn't," he cut in. "You can only see them in reflections, or in your peripheral vision. Never head on." I swallowed. "And they what? Just stand there?" He didn't blink as he stared at me. "No," he whispered. "They wait. The moment you stop moving for too long, they take you." A sharp chill ran through me. I let out a shaky breath. "Okay, let's say I believe you. What am I supposed to do?" He swallowed hard. "Leave this store, get in your car, and drive." I licked my lips. My throat was dry. "And then what?" He opened his mouth, and the lights flickered. I froze. The hum of the fluorescent bulbs died for half a second before buzzing back to life. The cashier went rigid. "Shit," he whispered. His eyes darted behind me. I didn't turn around. Couldn't, because in the convex security mirror above the counter, I saw it. A tall, shadowy figure, standing directly behind me. The lights flickered again, and this time the shadow was closer. The lights flickered again, and the shadow in the mirror was closer. Couldn't breathe. My body felt locked in place, my brain screaming at me to move, to do something. But the weight of that thing behind me made it impossible. The cashier's breath hitched. Don't stop moving," he whispered. I forced myself to step forward, my legs stiff, heart slamming against my ribs. In the convex mirror, the shadow didn't follow me. It stayed frozen in place, exactly where I had been standing. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see my own reflection in the glass door. The shadow was still there. No details, no face, just a jagged outline, ink bleeding into the world. And then its head twitched. I nearly stumbled. "Okay," I breathed. "Okay, what the hell is that?" The cashier's hands were gripping the counter so hard his knuckles had turned white. "You stopped moving in the parking lot, didn't you?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. I guess." My brain was struggling to process everything. "I got out of my car. Then that's when it attached to you," he muttered. "If you stop moving for too long, they lock on." My breath hitched. "They?" The words barely left my mouth when my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. I fumbled for it, hands shaking. The screen glowed red. "Warning. Movement speed inadequate. Increase velocity." I swallowed. What does that mean?" The cashier licked his lips. "It means walking won't be enough for long." That chill from earlier, cold and clawing, ran through me again. That's bullshit." But my own voice sounded weak. The cashier just kept staring. My hands were sweaty. My knees felt like they might buckle. I wanted to wake up. I wanted to shake this off as some kind of stress-induced nightmare and go back to my normal, boring life. But the shadow in the mirror was still standing there, and the longer I looked, the more it seemed to twitch, like it was getting impatient. "Listen," the cashier said, his voice low and urgent. "You need to get in your car and leave. Keep driving. Don't stop. Don't park. Just go." I let out a breath. "And then what?" He hesitated. "You'll see." That wasn't exactly comforting. But when the lights flickered again, and I saw the shadow's arm start to lift in the mirror, I decided I wasn't going to argue. I grabbed my drink and backed toward the door, keeping my eyes locked on the mirror. The second my foot hit the parking lot pavement, I broke into a run. I practically threw myself into the driver's seat, jamming the key into the ignition with fumbling fingers. The moment the engine roared to life, my phone buzzed again. "Motion detected. Keep moving." I slammed my foot onto the gas. My tires squealed as I tore out of the lot, hands clenched around the wheel, my heart hammering so fast I thought it might burst. The streets were still empty. Streetlights cast long, eerie shadows onto the pavement as I drove, each one making me feel like something was watching. I swallowed. My throat was dry. "Think, man," I muttered to myself. "Think." The cashier had seemed to know something. He'd been terrified, sure, but he had rules. 1. Don't stop moving. 2. If you stop, they find you. 3. If they find you, I didn't know what happened after that. But the way he had looked at me, the sheer fear in his expression, told me that I didn't want to find out. I kept driving. 10 minutes passed, then 20. I was gripping the wheel so tight my hands were cramping, but nothing was happening. The city looked normal. Empty but normal. Maybe this was all some elaborate joke. Maybe my headlights flashed over a car up ahead. A black sedan, parked dead center in the middle of the road. I slowed. The driver's side door was open. I squinted, pulse thudding in my ears. There was no one inside. The hairs on my arms stood up. I pressed the gas, swerving around the abandoned car. That's when I saw them. People, or what was left of them. Silhouettes of figures standing completely still on the sidewalk. Not moving, not shifting, just frozen. I tried to tell myself they were statues. Maybe some weird art installation I had never noticed before. But as I sped past, I caught something in my rearview mirror. One of the figures turned its head. It was watching me. My breath hitched. My hands clenched around the wheel. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop. I forced my foot down on the gas. The speedometer ticked up. 50, 60, 70. The streetlights blurred past. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't check it. Couldn't. I just kept driving. I must have driven for an hour, the fear slowly morphing into exhaustion. My eyelids were heavy. My arms ached. My foot on the pedal felt like it was made of lead. I couldn't keep this up forever. I needed a plan. That's when I saw another gas station up ahead, a different one. And inside, there were people. They were moving, pacing in circles, jogging in place, even crawling on their hands and knees, not stopping. My stomach twisted. I pulled into the lot and left the car rolling forward at a crawl before throwing it into park at the last second and jumping out mid-step. Because I knew if I stopped, even for a second, they would be there. I stumbled inside, breathless, heart pounding. The other people didn't even glance at me. A woman in an oversized hoodie was jogging in place by the chip aisle, eyes dull with exhaustion. A man in a business suit was pacing in slow, stiff circles, muttering under his breath. A teenager was rolling across the floor, over and over. The cashier, a different one this time, was hopping behind the counter as he scanned items, his lips pressed into a tight, miserable line. None of them stopped, not once. I looked at the security mirror above the counter. The shadows were inside too, waiting. I stood in the middle of the gas station, heart hammering, trying to process what I was looking at. Every single person inside was moving in some way or another. A man in a suit pacing in slow, mechanical circles. A woman jogging in place beside the chip aisle, her head lolling with exhaustion. A teenager rolling across the dirty floor, his hoodie covered in dust and grime. And none of them looked at me, like they were beyond caring, like they had been doing this for a long time. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to keep shifting, my feet shuffling just enough to keep myself in motion. Behind the counter, the cashier, a middle-aged man with deep bags under his eyes, was hopping as he rang up a purchase, barely paying attention. I took a breath and stepped toward him. "Hey," I rasped. He didn't look up, just kept bouncing in place. I clenched my jaw. "Dude, I need answers," he sighed, finally cutting me a glance. "What's there to answer?" He gestured vaguely around the store. "You got the alert. Now you know." I stared at him. "Know what?" His lips twitched. Not a smile. Something closer to resignation. "That stopping isn't an option anymore." The words landed like a stone in my gut. I took a breath, flexing my fingers. "Okay, but for how long? Like, what's the end game here? How do I get rid of this?" The cashier laughed, a dry, bitter chuckle that made my skin crawl. "You don't." I stared at him. "That's not funny, man." He kept laughing, but there was nothing funny about it. "You think I'd be doing this?" He gave a little, pathetic hop. "If I had a choice?" My stomach twisted. No, that couldn't be right. There had to be a way out. I turned to the others. The jogger, the pacer, the kid on the floor. They weren't speaking, like they'd given up even asking. I felt sick. I turned back to the cashier. "What happens if you stop?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, He reached under the counter and tapped on a small security monitor. I followed his gaze. The screen showed the gas station's exterior, 4 different angles covering the parking lot and the road beyond. There were shadows out there, a dozen, maybe more, just standing there, jagged, twisting shapes, frozen like black stains against the pavement. Some leaned unnaturally, like broken mannequins barely holding together. I felt cold all over. They were waiting for one of us to stop. A deep, clawing panic started rising in my throat. I turned to the cashier again, my voice barely above a whisper. "How long have you been like this?" His eyes darkened. I stopped counting. I couldn't stay in the gas station forever. Even if I wanted to, I kept shifting my weight, forcing myself to move as I racked my brain for a plan. There had to be a way out of this. The alert had come from somewhere. That meant someone knew. Someone was sending warnings. Someone had to understand this thing. I took a shaky breath and pulled my phone from my pocket. Warning: movement speed inadequate. Increased velocity. I clenched my teeth. Shut up. I backed away from the counter, still shuffling my feet, and turned toward the door. "You're leaving?" the cashier asked flatly. I swallowed. "I can't stay here." He let out a soft chuckle. "Good luck." I ignored him and stepped outside. The moment I did, I felt them. I didn't see them move, but I felt them get closer. I sucked in a sharp breath and forced my feet to pick up the pace, walking briskly toward my car. "Don't look. Don't stop. Just go." The air felt heavier, like something unseen was pressing down on me. I flung open my car door and slid inside, jamming the key into the ignition. My foot hit the gas before the door even shut all the way, and I tore out of the lot like the devil was behind me, because he probably was. The city wasn't empty anymore. I drove past other cars, their drivers all staring straight ahead, hands locked tight on the wheel, knuckles white. I passed people on the sidewalks, jogging, pacing, twitching. A man in a business suit was doing lunges outside a fast food place. A woman was hopping on one foot at a crosswalk. They were all moving, and the worst part, no one looked panicked anymore. Not like I felt. They looked resigned, like they'd been doing this for so long they had stopped questioning it. My stomach clenched. How many people had gotten the alert? How many were trapped in this? My phone buzzed. Movement speed stable. Maintain course. I licked my lips. My mouth was dry as hell. I needed to figure out what to do. There had to be an answer, and I was going to find it. I pulled up to a red light. Reflex. Instinct. My foot almost tapped the brakes, but then I saw the car beside me, a black sedan. The driver was staring straight ahead, not blinking, not breathing, and behind him, something was in the back seat, a dark, jagged outline, motionless. I let out a strangled breath and slammed my foot on the gas, blowing through the intersection. I didn't care if I got pulled over. I wasn't stopping. The city blurred past me. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to go somewhere. I needed information. I needed answers. And then I thought of it. The police station. I wasn't sure why it hadn't occurred to me before. But if something like this was happening, if people were disappearing, if the city had gone insane, then the cops would have noticed. They had to have records, files, something. Maybe they even had a way to fix this. I turned onto Main Street, heading toward the precinct. I was going to get some answers, or die trying. The police station was dark. Not just closed for the night dark, abandoned dark. The windows were blacked out. The parking lot was half full, but every car was empty. No cops standing around, no officers patrolling the entrance, just stillness. And that was the most unnerving part, because everywhere else people were moving. Even if it was just a shuffle, a twitch, or a slow, exhausted jog. Everyone I had seen was following the rule. But here, nothing. I tightened my grip on the wheel, rolling past the front doors. My brain was screaming at me to turn around. I didn't, because I needed answers. I pulled into a space and let my car crawl forward a few extra inches before putting it in park, making sure that I never fully stopped moving before I stepped out. A gust of cold wind hit me, and with it came that horrible, heavy feeling, like something unseen was bearing down on me. I didn't look around, didn't check the reflections in the glass. I just started walking. The front doors were unlocked, which was another bad sign. I hesitated for a half second before pushing inside, the glass doors whispering shut behind me. The station smelled like dust and cold metal. Dim emergency lights flickered overhead, casting eerie, stuttering shadows across the floor. I kept moving, even though I wanted to stop. Even though my instincts were telling me to listen, to make sure I wasn't alone. The lobby was empty. The chairs, the reception desk, the coffee machine in the corner, all still and silent. I swallowed hard and made my way to the main hallway. The station should have been buzzing with activity. Dispatchers on the radios, cops coming and going, officers processing arrests, filling out paperwork. Something. Instead, it felt like a graveyard, a cold, quiet graveyard. I passed the holding cells first. Empty. No prisoners. No officers. Not even an echo of movement. Just coats and belts left on the backs of chairs. Papers scattered across desks like they had been abandoned mid-shift, like people had just vanished. I forced my legs to keep moving as I approached the records room. That was what I needed. If anyone had been tracking whatever the hell this was, it would be in there. I pushed open the door and stepped inside, and nearly tripped over a body. I staggered back, heart lurching into my throat. It was an officer, or what was left of him. He was slumped against a filing cabinet, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, his arms frozen in a rigid, grasping position. His face was locked in an expression of pure terror, mouth slightly open, eyes wide and staring, like he had been reaching for something, or running. I swallowed back bile, forcing my legs to move as I stepped around him. There were more bodies scattered across the floor, some in chairs, some halfway out the door, as if they had collapsed mid-stride. But they weren't rotting, they weren't even decomposed, they were just frozen, like mannequins left in the exact position they had been standing when they stopped moving. I clenched my fists. There had to be something in here, some kind of explanation. I turned to the file cabinets, and then I saw it, a folder, clutched in the frozen hands of the officer closest to me, like he had been trying to take it somewhere when he stopped. I bent down and yanked it free. My phone buzzed, movement speed inadequate. Increased velocity. I gritted my teeth and opened the folder. Inside, photos of shadows, jagged, twisted figures lingering in reflections. Watching, dozens of them. Some were in security footage. Some were hand-drawn sketches, rough and frantic, like someone had been trying to record what they saw before it was too late. And then, stapled to the back of the folder was a single page of notes. Case number 4147. Missing persons incidents. Ongoing. Summary. Over 75 reported cases of individuals who have vanished after ceasing movement for an extended period of time. Eyewitness reports describe dark figures appearing in reflections shortly before disappearances. Patterns. Victims receive an emergency alert instructing them to maintain movement. Once an entity has locked onto an individual, cessation of motion results in immediate assimilation. Conclusion. Unknown. No known methods of prevention or escape. All reports indicate permanence of condition. I stared at the last sentence. Permanence of condition. I swallowed hard. I was going to be like this forever? My hands were shaking as I flipped through the rest of the pages. There had to be something. Some clue. Some hint of an answer. And then, near the bottom of the stack, I found another memo. A handwritten note in frantic, messy script. Don't trust the alerts. They're not telling us everything. There's a way out. My breath hitched. A way out. Before I could process it, my phone buzzed again. Warning. Hostile presence detected. Increased velocity immediately. The temperature dropped. I felt it behind me. I didn't look. I ran. I sprinted down the hallway, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My muscles burned. My lungs screamed, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not with the thing behind me. I didn't see it. I didn't need to. I felt it. Presence at my back, pressing in, closing the distance. I slammed through the front doors, nearly stumbling onto the pavement outside. The streetlights flickered. My car was still running, idling in the parking lot, waiting. I threw myself inside and peeled out of the lot like my life depended on it, because it did. And now I knew there was a way out. I just had to find it. I didn't stop driving for what felt like hours. My mind was a blur, thoughts scattered between the terror of the chase and the nagging voice that told me to look closer at the warning. That last message on my phone had been clear. Warning. Hostile presence detected. Increased velocity immediately. The words echoed in my head like a drumbeat. Hostile presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't about survival anymore. It wasn't about whether I kept moving or not. The more I thought about it, the more I realized the alerts weren't just about trying to keep us from stopping. They were meant to keep us in the dark. The alerts aren't telling us everything. The handwritten note from the police station burned in my memory. Someone had known, even if only for a second. They'd known that there was something else to this. Something deeper than what the authorities were telling us. But what? I pulled over at an old diner on the outskirts of town, headlights cutting through the early morning fog. The sign above the diner was half shattered, the neon flickering weakly. The town was still, silent. I stepped out of my car, keeping my feet moving, never fully stopping, never letting my legs rest. I didn't know why I felt like it was necessary, but I couldn't shake the urge to keep shifting. The diner's door creaked when I pushed it open, and the smell of stale coffee mixed with grease and dust filled the air. I was alone. The place was deserted. There were dirty dishes on the counter, half-eaten meals left behind, and yet no one around. Felt like a ghost town. I hesitated but then spotted something. Papers scattered across the counter, and an old radio sitting near the register. I stepped toward the counter, but before I could get close, I heard a low hum. It wasn't from the radio. It was coming from somewhere else. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I felt my chest tighten. Warning: movement speed inadequate. Increase velocity. I groaned, shoving the phone back in my pocket. I didn't have time for this. Didn't have time for whatever this sick game was. I scanned the papers on the counter. Some of them looked like old menus or invoices, but a few were handwritten notes. Random scribbles, hastily written, with words like "don't stop" and "they're coming for us." I picked up one and nearly choked. It was a note from someone who had been tracking the phenomena. They had drawn a map, marking places of interest, places where people had vanished. There were symbols, cryptic and unclear, but one of them caught my eye: the Watchers. I stared at it, the ink bold against the faded paper. The Watchers? Was this what the note had meant? These dark figures were called Watchers? And if they were watching us, why? The hum from before intensified. It was louder now, almost like a buzzing, a static noise that felt like it was pushing in on me from every angle. I turned to the radio, almost expecting it to be the source, but it wasn't. The noise wasn't coming from the outside world. It was coming from within. I looked down at my hands. My fingers were trembling, but not in the way they had before. This felt different, a kind of compulsion. Then I heard it: footsteps. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but when the sound grew closer, I froze. There was someone here, but when I turned toward the door, no one was there. Still, the footsteps kept coming. Slow, steady, a creeping rhythm, like they knew I was there and were waiting for me to stop. I backed away, my mind racing, heart pounding in my ears. The humming noise kept getting louder, and the sensation of being watched tightened around my chest like a vice. I had to move. I didn't want to, but I had to. My phone buzzed again. Warning: hostile presence detected. Increase velocity immediately. I was done. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. All I knew was that I needed to keep moving. I bolted for the door, and as I yanked it open, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of the glass. A shadow, tall, jagged, watching. I didn't stop to see what it was. I didn't even look back. I ran out of the diner, into the cold night air, feet pounding on the cracked pavement. I didn't know where I was going. I just needed to get away from it. But that hum, it followed me. And the shadow? I could still feel it, just behind me, always watching. I had made a huge mistake coming here. I had thought there would be answers, but instead, I had only found more questions. The Watchers, they were real. And if the notes were right, they weren't just watching. They were hunting. I threw myself back into the car, slamming the door behind me. The engine roared to life as I sped off, my eyes scanning the road ahead, never looking in the rearview mirror. The warnings on my phone were relentless, each message pushing me harder, faster. I tried to shake the feeling, but I couldn't. It was as if I had become part of the game. The Watchers knew me now. The questions kept tumbling in my head. What were they? Where did they come from? Why us? And the one that haunted me more than any other: what happens if we stop? I was beginning to understand the severity of that answer. Couldn't stop. Not ever. Not unless I wanted to join them. The city blurred past me as I sped through the streets. My eyes never left the road, but my mind was consumed by the horrifying realization. The watchers weren't just following me. They were already here. The air was thick with the hum of the alerts, pulsing with an intensity that felt like it was crawling inside my skull, making everything feel claustrophobic. Each message was a constant reminder. Increase velocity immediately. I wanted to scream, but even that felt like it could be dangerous. Every second I wasn't moving, I was at risk. The radio buzzed again, static filling the car. I fumbled for the dial, trying to change the station, but nothing came through. Just the same buzzing hum, like the world itself had gone silent, save for this eerie, oppressive noise. Then it stopped. For the first time in what felt like hours, there was silence. No buzz, no alerts, no hum. I exhaled slowly, but before I could even consider what that meant, my phone buzzed again. Alert, hostile entity approaching. Maintain movement. It was getting worse. The thing that had been hunting me, watching me from the shadows, was closing in. I gripped the wheel tighter, focusing on the road, trying to block out the creeping panic that was rising in my chest. The watchers were real, and whatever they were hunting. But I still didn't know why. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had missed something, some critical detail that could change everything. I needed answers. I turned the car off the main road and headed toward the library, an old, abandoned building that hadn't been used for decades. It was the kind of place that had been forgotten, untouched, gathering dust. But it felt like the last place that could hold the truth I was looking for. I parked out front, the car idling as I checked the time. I knew I couldn't stay still for too long. The watchers were out there, and they were getting closer. But this had to be done. I stepped out of the car, keeping my legs moving. I didn't stop, not even to breathe. The library's doors were unlocked, creaking as I pushed them open. The interior was dark and cold, and it reeked of mildew and forgotten memories. I took a deep breath and walked in, the soft scrape of my feet echoing through the silence. The shelves were stacked high with old books. Some were cracked and falling apart. Others looked like they'd never been touched. But there were a few sections that caught my eye. Books on the paranormal, cryptic texts, notes from what seemed like crazed individuals. Anything that could give me the edge I needed. I began to scour the shelves, pulling down anything that looked even remotely useful. Pages of rituals, warnings, stories of creatures that lurked in the shadows. Nothing concrete, nothing solid. I flipped through pages filled with warnings about shadows, mentions of otherworldly entities that thrived on fear, and countless legends that never quite explained anything. I could feel the weight of time pressing down on me. Every moment spent here meant one more moment I was staying still, one more moment closer to being caught. But I had to keep going. I pulled down a thick, dusty tome that seemed more recent than the rest. Its spine cracked as I opened it, pages turning with a soft rustle. At first, it looked like more of the same. Tales of creatures lurking beyond the veil, warnings about ancient forces that preyed on the unprepared. But then, I found something different, a diagram. It was crudely drawn, a large shadowed figure looming over a group of people. The figure's shape was indistinct, shifting between forms, a blur of motion, a presence that felt both everywhere and nowhere. At the bottom of the page, there was a note. The watchers are bound by motion. They are drawn to the stillness of the soul, the emptiness of those who refuse to move, to live. The words sent a chill down my spine. I quickly scanned the rest of the passage, my pulse racing as the pieces started falling into place. The watchers were no mere monsters. They were interdimensional beings drawn to those who stopped moving, who stopped living. The more they watched, the more they consumed. And the longer you stayed still, the closer you got to becoming part of their world. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about not becoming a part of them. I felt the hairs on my neck stand up as I heard it again. The faint hum. Closer. I slammed the book shut and grabbed a few more, shoving them into my bag. I couldn't stay. I couldn't even take a second to think. I dashed toward the exit, but as I reached the door, I felt it. The air shifted. Something was in the building. Something that was not just watching but actively moving toward me. I didn't dare look behind me as I ran back to the car. The hum was louder now, almost deafening. filling every corner of my mind, consuming every thought. But I couldn't stop. The watchers were closing in, and if I stopped moving, even for a second, I would never leave this place. I threw myself into the car and slammed the door shut. The engine roared to life, and I sped off, my foot pressing down on the accelerator, pushing the car to its limit. But the hum didn't stop. It was everywhere, and the watchers, they were just getting closer. The world outside the car was a blur of motion, but my mind was still caught on the one truth I'd learned in the library. The watchers were drawn to stillness. They thrived on it, feeding off those who stopped moving, who grew complacent in the face of fear. I gripped the steering wheel harder, knuckles white, my foot pressing down harder on the gas pedal. My eyes flickered to the rearview mirror every few seconds, but I couldn't see anything. Not yet. The night outside was dark, endless, the headlights slicing through the blackness in sharp, almost painful angles. I wasn't alone anymore. I could feel them, somewhere out there in the shadows, lurking just out of view. The hum was growing louder, couldn't stop, not even for a second. You don't stop. You don't stop. You don't stop. The words echoed in my head, a chant I had repeated over and over. They were a lifeline, the only thing keeping me grounded in a world that was rapidly falling apart. But even though I was moving, I felt like I was already trapped. It wasn't just the hum or the shadows in the corners of my vision. It wasn't even the sensation that they were watching. It was something else, something far more dangerous. It was the creeping fatigue. I hadn't slept in what felt like days. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't done anything but move. And the more I pushed myself, the more I could feel the toll it was taking on my body. My eyes were gritty, my muscles sore from the tension. My mind felt like it was turning to static, thoughts fading in and out like a bad radio signal. Stop. The word entered my head unbidden, like an intrusive thought, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the temptation to pull over, close my eyes, just for a minute. I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, pushing the car harder, faster. No, the temptation to rest, to finally stop for just a second, was overwhelming. But I knew the price of that moment. I had seen it in the notes. I had felt it in my bones. The watchers weren't just predators. They were parasites, feeding off any moment of weakness. I pulled off the road and into an abandoned parking lot. The pavement cracked and uneven. The car came to a screeching halt, and I threw it in park, my hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. The hum, that deafening sound, seemed to reverberate in my skull, and I felt it, the presence closing in. Couldn't be still here. I knew that, but the weight of exhaustion was unbearable. Every muscle in my body screamed for rest, for release. I reached for my phone, desperate for some sign that there was a way out of this, some way to fight back. And then I saw it, a new alert. Warning, sustained movement necessary. Fatigue detected. Increased danger. The words burned in my eyes. Fatigue detected. Increased danger. It was as if the watchers knew. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel. Couldn't stop. Not for a second. But no matter how fast I pushed the car, how much I tried to outrun the darkness behind me, I could feel the cost mounting. I wasn't the only one feeling it, though. I'd seen it in the other survivors, the ones who'd come before me, people who had made it just far enough, only to fall prey to the stillness. They had tried to outrun the watchers just like I was, but they hadn't understood that there was no safe place to hide. They had paid the price, and I was starting to understand that there was a price to everything, even movement. I looked at the speedometer, 100 miles an hour. My hands were still shaking, but I forced myself to press on, my eyes scanning the road ahead. The hum was a constant presence now, vibrating in the back of my mind like an electric shock, never letting me forget that they were out there, watching, waiting. I couldn't think anymore. I couldn't process. All I could focus on was the need to move, the need to keep alive. I had no plan. I didn't even know where I was going. All I knew was that stopping was the worst thing I could do. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. The road ahead had become a blur, the line between night and day indistinguishable, as though time itself had lost meaning. I looked at the horizon, searching for some sign of safety, something, anything that could stop the creeping dread in my chest. But there was nothing. Nothing but the road. And the watchers. My eyes felt heavy. The world was starting to blur. I was so tired. The sound of the hum intensified. It was right behind me now. I could hear the shuffle of feet, the soft scrape of something dragging, like a clawed hand on the ground. It was closer, and then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of breathing. It wasn't human. It was deep, ragged, almost unnatural. A wheezing, rattling sound that sent shivers down my spine. I knew it was one of them. The watchers were closing in, and I couldn't stop. Not for a second. I floored the gas pedal, pushing the car harder, faster. I wasn't sure how long I could keep this up, how long any of us could, but there was no choice. The price of stopping wasn't just my life, it was something far worse. If I stopped moving, I'd become part of their world. I could feel the car vibrating beneath me, the engine growling in protest, but I kept pushing it. The tires screeched against the cracked asphalt, the rhythmic beat of the hum growing louder, more intense with each passing second. The watchers were here, no doubt about it. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. The weight of their presence, their eyes tracking my every movement, gnawing at my skin, my soul. It wasn't just the hum anymore. It was in the air, like static, something I could almost taste on the back of my tongue. Every breath I took seemed to fuel the noise, filling my mind with an endless drone that was quickly becoming unbearable. I needed to make a choice. The road stretched out ahead of me, endless and unforgiving. I couldn't keep this up forever. The fatigue was overwhelming. Every part of my body was screaming at me to stop, to rest, to take a moment. But I knew what that would mean. There was no taking a moment. I didn't know what would happen when I finally collapsed, but I had seen the others. I had seen them stop moving, seen what became of them. Their bodies were still, but their eyes were empty. Their souls lost to the watchers, consumed in that one fatal instant when they allowed themselves to rest. I couldn't let that happen to me. The road blurred as I drove, my hands slick against the wheel, the car jerking and swaying under my frantic attempts to keep control. There were no signs of life ahead, just the long stretch of highway that led nowhere. Nothing but the sound of my pulse in my ears and the incessant hum that had become my constant companion. I glanced at the rearview mirror, barely able to focus through the haze of exhaustion. No one behind me, but I could feel them. I could feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting, and then I saw it, a flicker in the darkness, just outside the range of my headlights. Something moved, shifting, indistinct. I didn't have time to think. The brake lights ahead of me were glowing red, and instinct pushed me to turn the wheel sharply to the left. I barely missed the other car, another victim of the road, its once gleaming surface now chipped and battered. The doors were open, but there was no sign of the driver. They were already gone. I shoved the gear into drive, my mind racing as I sped past the abandoned vehicle. I needed to find somewhere to hide, somewhere that wasn't just another pit of despair. I couldn't stay on the road forever. The watchers were getting closer, and I had no idea how to escape them. I didn't even know if I could. I remembered a sign I'd passed a few miles back, an old gas station, long since out of service, but perhaps still offering some kind of shelter, a temporary reprieve. It was a stretch, but it was all I had. I swerved onto the exit ramp, my car rattling as the tires skidded along the wet pavement. I couldn't stop. I had to get there, to that abandoned shell of a station. The gas station was just as I remembered it. Run down, dilapidated, its windows dark and cracked. But it had a certain heaviness to it, an almost resonant silence that made my skin crawl. I parked the car as far from the door as I could, my gaze shifting nervously to the edges of the lot. I could sense them, the watchers, hovering just beyond my line of sight, waiting, ever patient. I wasn't sure if I could keep moving, not like this, but I couldn't stay still. I grabbed my bag and threw the door open, the cool night air slapping against my face like a cruel reminder of the world outside. Couldn't look back, not even once. I ran for the door, the familiar hum in my ears growing louder with every step. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was a presence. I felt it crawling under my skin, weaving into my thoughts, whispering things I couldn't understand, things that only made the fear that much worse. I threw open the gas station door, the hinges protesting with a squeal. The interior was pitch black, save for the faint glow of emergency exit signs above. I didn't stop to check for any signs of life. There was nothing but the weight of silence and the growing dread that the watchers were already closing in. I moved deeper into the building, not stopping for anything, not even to think. My legs burned, my heart pounded in my chest, but there was something worse, something unseen, and that made me keep moving. The hum was deafening now, reverberating off the walls, filling every inch of space with its insistent presence. I stumbled into the back room, dark, abandoned, and covered in layers of dust. But there was something there, something that caught my eye, a small window just big enough for me to crawl through. It was a way out, but I had to get to it first. The moment I stopped moving, just for a second, I felt it. The air around me grew colder. I felt the shift. The watchers were here. I had no choice but to move, to keep pushing forward. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if there was any way out of this nightmare. But I knew one thing for certain. If I stopped moving, it would be the last mistake I ever made. I scrambled toward the window, pushing my body through, feeling the sharp edges of the glass scrape against my skin. I didn't stop to check if they were following. I couldn't let myself think about it. I fell out the other side, hitting the ground hard, but I didn't hesitate. I didn't stop. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to keep moving.